So I'm brutally honest with myself about like the detriments to my own career. I spend so much time behind a computer, like if I don't actually work on it, my social skills deteriorate. Like that is totally a thing that engineers go through, Carpal tunnel syndrome, that's like going to happen. Like the stuff is important to think about. I was in the elevator today and like, the receptionist was asking me, oh yeah, are you ever like worried about your eyesight? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to be like legally blind by the time I'm 60. But they should make a parody movie. You have legally blonde for lawyers, legally blind for engineers and tech people,
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of welcoming back Shashank Kalanithi. Shashank is the reigning Iron Analyst, a data analyst turned senior data engineer, a YouTuber that has now amassed over 100,000 subscribers, and most importantly, a good friend. In this episode, we talk about how technology can be one of the great equalizers for inequality in the job market, how he was able to 6x his income through this field over the last 4 years, and about his experience on the Iron Analyst competition. I've linked the full competition in the description below if you're curious about that as well. This was a great chat with Shashank. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Shashank, thank you so much for coming back on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. Again, you're one of the very few people who has been on for a second time, which, is a great honor, let me tell you. We obviously caught up at the Creator Meetup a little over a month ago, maybe a little longer than that now. And I didn't get to sit down with you there. I definitely wanted to get you back on. Obviously, there's been some changes in your career. So I'm really excited to have you here to talk about your experience with the Creator event, with your career, with your prospective move to a new state. And I think we'll have a lot of fun here.
Thanks, Ken. I'm excited to be here. And it is a huge honor to be on the podcast for a second time. Our conversations are always really interesting. So I'm ready to get to it.
Amazing. Well, first, I want to congratulate you on air for hitting the 100,000 subscriber threshold. I know that happened a little while ago, but I think we all knew that it was destined to happen unless you just randomly deleted your channel. You're obviously providing such interesting and useful information. I'm interested in maybe how that's fit into your career as a whole. You're creating a lot of content, and I'm wondering, what is your onus? Like, what's the reason that you're providing such valuable information to so many people?
So it's kind of twofold, right? Like you said, it kind of dovetails into my career. Actually, funny story, it dovetails a little bit less smoothly than people would think it does. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it's because I teach kind of to people at a certain level. And then so like people that are like, managers and stuff typically don't end up seeing my content. But I'm hoping to change that in the future and like, kind of upgrade the content, especially because we've reached a length of time where people who have been with my channel for a while actually like have jobs or moving up in their careers. And so they're expecting more advanced content. But something that has helped me a lot of my career is that I take on new problems and learn about like new Python libraries and new data visualization libraries and stuff, because I, run into new challenges of trying to make stuff interesting for the channel. And I get to meet just a lot of really talented people who I learn, a ton from, you, Tina, Zach Wilson, the Seattle data guy, just tons of people who know like a lot about their field. And then, there's also fun stuff like, the Iron Analyst, which is as much as people might think that might be like an impractical thing, the general thought process of how can I drive as much value in as little time as possible underlies the entire Iron Analyst like competition. And I think is the kind of core thought process that any successful corporate person has, regardless of what your career is. If you are successful in corporate America, at your core, you're thinking, what is the greatest value I can like drive with the minimum amount of time, and trying to optimize for that to some extent. As far as why I started the channel, one was, kind of just to put out some of my teachings over there. But two was because I noticed like in America, we talk a lot about inequality of opportunity, inequality of just, like in general, right? Which I very much do believe exists. And I think one of the great things about the technical careers, software engineering, data analytics, data science, is that these are careers that are more meritocratic than others. Not every other career, but they're more meritocratic. there are definitely problems in the industry. Not to say that there aren't. Representation in our industry is still pretty bad. Racial representation is pretty bad. Gender representation is pretty bad. But if you kind of like break it down, right, there are fewer barriers to entry in this career than there are in many others. And there are fewer opportunities for nepotism than there are in other careers. Like I have a friend of a friend who, their father is like a judge. The legal career, politics, these are careers, Hollywood, these are careers where, nepotism is huge. So I wanted to use my platform as an opportunity to teach people, hey, if you're struggling in life, there's a decent chance your struggles are because of a lack of money. And this is a great platform to make a solid to unbelievable income. Solid as in, if you're a regular data analyst doing SQL and stuff, you can be making anywhere from 80 to 150K a year. Unbelievable if you're a data engineer, data scientist, near the top of your field, you could be making in excess of $500,000 a year. And it's an opportunity that is theoretically open to everyone,
Yeah, I think that technology in general is one of the great equalizers of inequality.
Mm-hmm.
You look at access to cell phones. I think there's some crazy statistic where the majority of the world's 7-8 billion people have access to a smartphone, which I think is crazy. That means in the palm of their hand, they have access to educational resources on how to code, on data analysis, on almost any career that they might be interested in. And I think that digital careers where their work can be done relatively remotely, I think software engineering, I think data analysis, I think data engineering, a lot of these fall into that category, are something that breaks down geographic barriers, but also breaks down educational barriers. Because from my perspective, someone can learn all of the relevant technical skills for one of these roles online for free. And what they learn, if they're applying it correctly, is just as good as what you're going to be getting in a classroom setting. You're going to have to be doing significantly more legwork on yourself. No one's going to be telling you exactly how to go about this. I mean, some YouTube channels, maybe like yours, are giving you more of a roadmap, but it's not the same hands-on approach like school.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it is free. And if you pay a little bit of money, in theory, you actually can get a lot of hands-on
Yep.
Hands-on focus on exactly what you need, which in some ways could be better than school. I always thought it was really funny, when I was in grad school, no one would use office hours, right? And when you look on YouTube, you look on these other platforms, that's what people pay for. Like people pay for consulting, they pay for office hours, they pay for these types of things. Who cares about the coursework? The coursework is replaceable by anywhere on the internet.
MIT places like most of their curriculum, like the greatest engineering university on the planet is just like, this isn't what makes it special.
Yeah. And to me, it was just mind-boggling that I had access to these people for free as part of my education, and no one was using it. Like in my mind, that is what you're paying for when you do school, when you do any of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And having access to people online to answer your questions, having access to a bunch of creators that are willing to give their time, that's worth as much as a lot of these degrees or any of these things to me. I mean, obviously, I don't personally offer my time for mentorship or those types of things, just because that's an issue of scale, right? If a lot of people are asking me the same question or something similar, I can make a video, I can do something that scales a lot better than me giving individual advice. I also, as we talked about before, I've just have too much on my plate that I'm not able to do that as well as I could. But at the same time, if you're thinking about value times reach, which is how I view things, I would hope that through the scalable content that I'm creating significantly more value overall than just individually meeting with people.
Mm-hmm.
Because while the individual value might be a little bit lower, the reach is just so much greater. Sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just very I think we're very much on the same page about how inequality is very present. But both of our very large focuses is on breaking down those barriers. And it's cool to see that we're in an industry where I think that is, I wouldn't say we're on the forefront, but it's pretty close.
Oh, 100%. Are we allowed to curse on this podcast?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that great book, Bullshit Jobs, right? That it kind of talks about this very interesting concept. It goes like it's way more in depth than like what I'm going to go into. But like, long story short, there are a lot of careers out there where it is difficult to justify paying people more. For me, those are the people I want to most. I mean, I want to help everyone, but I want to most help those people escape these careers that, quite honestly, look. I have a bleeding heart for people that live economically disadvantaged lives. But there are some economic activities I just can't wrap my head around. Like, how can we pay people a lot of money to do these things? A great example of this. Yesterday, I went into an undisclosed bank. I don't want to say because I'd like to be a sponsor of the channel one day. But I went into an undisclosed bank, and I signed up for an undisclosed credit card at this undisclosed bank. And this awesome credit card, great perks and everything. Because I personally like talking to people. So I like going into a retail store if I can and, just interacting with people, even though I can do the exact same thing online. And I keep running into this disappointing roadblock of you go over there and you realize that technology has obsoleted these people's jobs without people actually knowing that. So I go in there and this person says, okay, we need to go through a pre-approval process. I wasn't pre-approved for the credit card. Like, I was approved for the credit card, but I wasn't pre-approved. Pre-approved, usually you have to have some you have to be like double the standards of like what you need to get approved with the card. Also, like, getting approved for a card, you can get approved and just get a high interest rate, which I don't care about because I always pay my cards like on time. So the interest rate just doesn't affect me. But after that, this person couldn't get me the card. This person was like, oh, you have to go to the undisclosed bank's website and sign up over there. To me, what's the point of that job then? Like, what is this person, like, what extreme value is this person driving that we can pay this person more than $40K a year? And that's kind of where I think the American economy has, or I think economies all over the planet, but the American economy has a lot of these jobs where it is very, very difficult to justify paying people more because the algorithms actually control everything they can do and say. And I would like to give that person the opportunity. Hey, learn Python through my channel, learn SQL through my channel. It's all free. The most expensive thing I sell is $5 on my channel. And that too, it's optional. Like, I show the full guide and I'm like, if you want to, you can buy it in paper format. And hopefully that person can like pick that up and like, make a job where it is very easy to be like, oh yeah, we need to pay this person $100,000 a year. Like, they're driving, extreme value in our company. Right. There are a lot of service jobs like that.
Yeah. Well, it brings to mind one of my, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite books. It was a very good book. It's called So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. And the idea is that if you get so good at a skill that you're irreplaceable to your organization, your value goes up dramatically. They talk about this also in the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, where if you're irreplaceable, you have unbelievable leverage to take time off, to work significantly less, to do whatever it is. And that's twofold, right? You can get really good at a specific role, better than everyone else to make yourself replaceable. But you can also find a job where the job is very dependent on your skill and ability. So a lot of people talk about the idea of a 10x data scientist or a 10x developer or whatever this is. And you brought this up a little bit offline, but there isn't, in my mind, such thing as like a 10x bank teller, right?
Right.
How could someone possibly be that much better at their job if their job is very narrowly confined?
Like, where is your leverage to be the best,
Exactly.
In a way that matters. Sorry, you can be the best. You can offer excellent customer service. And I've been to banks where they offer excellent customer service. And, the best thing I can do is write a letter to the head office. But beyond that, like what is, and this is not all service jobs, right? So for example, I used to work at Nordstrom. And Nordstrom, we have like retail people and they get paid commission. And that's different, right? Because I can go in there and I can be like, I want X, Y, Z. And I've had amazing experiences at Nordstrom where like this person like helps me get exactly what I need. But at a bank where the products are very structured, approval is automated, and you can't overwrite anything. Did I ever tell you the story about how data science completely obsoleted the bank manager role? Like, so we're a little bit different in age. So you might remember this, but I remember back when I was a kid, right? So I'm a kid of the 90s. My parents would go into a bank, and we'd spend a lot of time in banks, right? So in my mind, banks are this place you spend a lot of time in to get, mortgages, XYZ, right? And it was because my parents like were doing all this stuff at the tail end of the 1990s and then like the early 2000s, when a bank manager, this is before like computers just took over everything, a bank manager could approve or deny your loan. And they could do it based on certain factors you give them. Oh, this person's a good member of the community. They have all these business things that show that they're like trustworthy. They kind of like look like a trustworthy way, which, introduces all kinds of bias separately. But, it used to be a job that was respected on the level of a doctor or like a lawyer. Depending on who you are, right? But a doctor, let's go with the doctor.
Insurance, yes.
Yeah. But now it's a glorified sales role. Like a bank manager has zero ability to approve or deny anything at anything but the smallest credit unions, because data science, like your credit report, determines everything. My mortgage was not determined by a bank manager; it was determined by an algorithm that the people at the bottom have no. Again, it's a whole Andreessen Horowitz thing, right? You either live above the API or below the API.
This episode is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation-grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high-performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that Z workstations can come standard with Linux, and they can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right to work doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. Well, that's another wrinkle which I think is really interesting to look at, is the amount of impact and control you can have in your work is something that I would evaluate an overall career on, right? So, we talked about a bank manager. How much control do they really have? How much influence do they have to exert, influence on any of the things that they do? As you mentioned, they're sort of glorified sales managers. But at the same time, on the other side of that, I think sales is a career that you can, in some sales, you can exert a lot of control over, right?
Smaller sales.
Exactly. And so to me, if I were to relook at my career options, and obviously I like the one that I've chosen, mainly because I have so much control over the work that I do. And so software engineers, data analysts, data scientists, even salespeople for that matter, even lawyers to some extent, depending on the law firm, you have a lot of ability to control how you do your work. And if you can do your work at a higher level through that control, then you can clearly differentiate yourself. If you don't have control over what's going on in your work, you have very little, not value, you have very, very little means to go above and beyond and to prove that you're this irreplaceable person. Like hard work is only so much. Where you could be the hardest working, most innovative bank teller, and you're maybe 20% better. Whereas if you were doing that as a software engineer, a data scientist, even a lawyer or a salesperson, you could be 80, 100, 1,000x better. Which is
with
crazy.
a SWE, like software engineer, it's even crazier, right? Because a lot of my friends who are SWEs, like they work 4 hours a day. So the ones that work 6 hours a day are actually like extraordinary engineers. Kind of a converse of what you're saying, but I think is also important. And this is kind of like my Machiavellian way of thinking is how much is the government in your corner? And this, for example, why do doctors get paid as much as they do? Why do lawyers get paid as much as they do? It's because no one can you can't just get up one day and decide you want to become a doctor. Like you literally cannot just do that. In the United States, it takes like 8 years, 8+ years to become a doctor, or 8 years to become a lawyer. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, what regulation in software engineering? Anyone can become a software engineer, right? The regulation that's on the side of people who work in, data, software engineering, like, I'm kind of using software engineering as a catch-all term for these professions, is American visa law, if we're talking about America. If America had open immigration, like we just, let people immigrate here, obviously check people and stuff, the number of people that would come in from India and China to like fill in these software development roles, it would totally crush wages over here for that. This isn't a political discussion as to what immigration policy we should take. It's me explaining that one reason that the data science, engineering, these roles are paid so much is because the government's in the corner of we're going to heavily limit immigration and make it extremely difficult for people to obtain H-1B visas, permanent residency, and these other things that would drastically increase the supply of these qualified workers. The qualified workers, they exist in the world. They're not legally able to come here.
Yeah, I mean that's 100% true. I think that that's something we see in wages in other countries around data science. You know, in
Mhm.
India, I think data science is a very well respected role, but it's not proportionally as well paid as it is in the States or in some places in Europe. It's a very interesting equation to look at, right? It's not
Right.
like a purely free market type of thing, and especially in the U.S., that's something that it's fortunately U.S. citizens can capitalize on in a very unique way. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say we're getting um, disproportionately paid, but for the for like the global economic system, yes, it is disproportionate. You look at like the Stack Overflow developer survey, and
Mhm.
you're seeing, oh, like data scientists globally, yeah, I mean, they're making a good living, but it's definitely not the I wouldn't say overinflated, but like it's not proportionally similar to what we're seeing in the US markets or in a lot of interesting Europe markets.
And I mean, in America, it's because we have so much other stuff going for us, right? Like a lot, like global tech innovation. Although it happens everywhere, more of it happens here for sure. Um, and there's more money flowing into advocating for that innovation from Wall Street. But that's like a whole rabbit hole that maybe I'll start a podcast one day talking about that stuff, like the politics behind software engineering, data engineering, stuff like that, and like the stuff that engineers don't think about, but are part of the reason that they live the lives that they're able to live.
Yeah. Well, I also think that um, demand is a really important part of that equation that we talked about, right? So even if you're irreplaceable to an organization, if you have no other options, you don't have a ton of leverage, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that this skill set is in so much demand because all these companies, they want to build things, right? They want to innovate.
Mhm.
They want to cut costs. They want to do a lot of these things, which data and software engineering can help with. That to me is another big part of this equation is like knowing that you have other options can drive your price up tremendously. And good, those people that are even just slightly better than the average engineer or data scientist or whatever it might be, they have unbelievable leverage because there are so many options for them, at least in the current market. And that's something I'm always thinking about too. Is that okay? If I'm like a doctor, right? Are hospitals going out of their way to find new like doctors? Is like a 5x doctor better than any other doctor in terms of competitors? Not necessarily, right? But in this industry that's driven by competition and innovation,
Mhm.
other companies value you disproportionately, which I think is another really unique factor that makes this domain one of these ones that can break those break down a lot of those barriers around disadvantage.
Oh yeah, and it's like this is funny because this is actually an example of the government working against doctors versus working for people in tech. Um, if you're a doctor, like you can't just switch states instantly and go like
Yeah,
halfway
board
across the
settlement.
country and go work somewhere else. You can't working remotely. There's regulations around that. But if you work in software, there's this great book called The Code. I forget what the author's name is, but she's this really smart lady from the University of Washington, and and I'm heavily simplifying over here. There are many reasons why California became Silicon Valley and not Dallas, Texas, even though Dallas, Texas has Texas Instruments, which at the time, and even today, is one of the greatest innovators in chip
TI
technology.
83 baby.
Yeah, there you go. And one of the big reasons is because in California, non-competes are very difficult to enforce. Extremely, you basically can't enforce them. In Texas, they're very very easy to enforce, and because of that, there's a huge. If you're an engineer or you're a tech person in California, switching companies is super easy, and it's why people in California do it so much, because your employer has limited options to stop you from doing that. Versus in Texas, there are all these options to stop people from, switching companies rapidly in order to, go to wherever the most innovation is happening, or wherever they're paid the best, or wherever they're able to most quickly realize their ideas. It's an example of the government being in your corner again.
Fascinating. I actually didn't I'd never thought of that. That is pretty fascinating. I mean, I'm starting to see it a lot more as I look into, where I incorporate my companies in terms of where I live geographically and those types of things. But interstate politics and policy has so much more impact than you think. I mean, just
Oh
me
yeah.
looking at taxes in different states is completely blowing my scalp off in terms of how I would evaluate a lot of these decisions. And when money is involved, it is a very interesting decision of like where you live, where you work, the company policies. It's a very nuanced equation that
Hmm.
I think a lot of people don't really consider all the ins and outs of.
And I think one danger a lot of tech people have is that it's one thing I've noticed. I live in Seattle now, right? So I'm surrounded by tech people. And I specifically live in the heart of tech in Seattle in South Lake Union, which is where Amazon is headquartered. I can actually see the Amazon executive office is right over there. And it's something I've noticed a lot of people in tech because a lot of them don't understand government very well. They kind of misconstrue the value that they drive as to the reason that they get paid the insane salaries. Like, for me, it's when I found out that people in engineering can get paid $500,000 plus before they hit the age of 30, that I was like, okay, like there's definitely something going on here. That's not just these people are very smart. Like very few people are that smart. But how are all these people? And, I mean, it's still not easy. This isn't like something that just everyone gets paid. But a decent number of people do get paid that amount of money. And that's what kind of got me researching. Okay, what are like the systematic things that push up the wages of these people? And the government's involved a lot more than people think it is. Like you were saying, it's tax policy, labor policy. This stuff is extremely important to influencing why things happen the way they do. If anyone is ever making $500,000 plus before the age of 30, you need to ask, okay, what help are they receiving? And the government will almost always be involved somewhere.
So specifically to data, for example, engineering, where you've now transitioned to from being a data analyst and data scientist, how is the government helping you in a different way?
So I think with data engineering, one of the big things is America has very bad privacy protections. Actually, really funny story. China recently passed a bunch of privacy laws in their country where at the private sector level, there is an argument that can be made that China has better privacy protection for its citizens than America does. Obviously, the government can still see everything you do and everything. So, let's not, I'm
From
not
other citizens.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm not, that's not lost on me. But for example, the Europeans they have excellent privacy protect, or they have decent privacy protections. I would still say there's a lot of work to do over there. The lack of privacy protections in America has made the amount of data that we can collect on citizens by private companies extremely high. That volume of data is so high that individual data scientists, even if they can process it, shouldn't be processing it. Like you do need a new job for that. And that's where data engineers come out of, right? So at a really high macro level, I think that's one way the government helps me as a data engineer. The US is very, very slow to enact any form of legislation on that. And even when we do, like California has something, but I'm in Washington, and then, there's always business in Texas where, as far as I'm aware, nothing's going on over there. So that's one thing. Obviously, tax law is very, very beneficial. Probably a really interesting example that people may not know about. If you work enough time in tech, you'll spend time with the Romanian outsourcing team. There's a couple of countries on the planet that are like stuff gets outsourced over there. India, the Philippines, Ukraine, to an extent, China.
There was some growth in Argentina for a while, but I think that's largely shut down.
Right. And Romania are big ones, right? Like outside of China, all English-speaking countries with large populations. And every single one of those countries, it's because there's a huge English-speaking population there, and which is entirely government policy, right? Like Romanians don't natively speak English; they learn it because the government educates them in it. But I went to Romania a couple of years ago, right? And I was talking to a lawyer over there at a coffee shop, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is a cool place. Like a UiPath and everything's here." And he's like, "Oh yeah, like in Romania, if you work in IT, I think it's like 2 to 3 years of income taxes. Just don't have to pay them. The first 2 to 3 years of your career, the government's like, you do not have to pay income taxes." Which all of a sudden makes the Romanian worker a lot more affordable, right? Because let's just say, let's just take American tax law, for example, right? The extra 30% you have to pay someone to make up for their taxes, you just don't have to pay it anymore. So yeah, I think there's the American example, there's the international example. I'd say the most obvious example for data professionals is the lack of privacy laws in America greatly increase the need for us to exist.
That's fascinating. I never would have thought of that, but it makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, obviously there's other incentives. So what went into your decision to go from data science to data engineering? Obviously there was a financial component, but what
Right.
other factors sort of drove you down that path?
So there was a couple of things, right? So I started off as a data analyst back in 2018 or something. Got my first job over there, and I was very, very lucky to have a young boss who was also like quite visionary, like for his own life and everything, and like told me about that. Data science exists. Um, and for me, I'm lucky enough to come from a family that kind of like expects monetary success. It's not like I always like to tell people, and I tell people it's an advantage that I have that I want to pass down to others. It's not trying to brag. It's trying to say this is what my parents did for me, and I'm trying to do this for you guys as well. The household I grew up in, it was never like, are you going to make $100,000? It was how many hundreds of thousands of dollars per year do you plan on making? It was kind of the thought process that like really like was like dug into me from a young age. And because of that, when I started off as a data analyst, I was being paid $55K a year. And I was like, okay, well, what's the upside on this job? Where do I eventually go from here? The logical conclusion was, okay, as a data analyst, unless I go into like management, which I didn't really want to at the time, I basically have to become a data scientist to make, the kind of income that I would find acceptable personally. So that kind of like started the impetus of it. And then eventually what started to happen was I started to realize Tableau really bored me. Like BI tools and stuff like that. And I was a lot more interested in like coding work and in like deeper analysis. I love using machine learning algorithms to like find interesting correlations and, stuff, correlations in like data. Basically from a intellectual rigor perspective, I didn't find data analysis particularly interesting. And so that's where I like that first company I was at, Interstate Batteries, was kind of where I like set my sights on, okay, I'm going to become a data scientist. And I wanted to do it without getting a master's degree. And the funny thing is actually like you were very instrumental in that decision to like not get a master's degree and try and get into data science. Because I remember I asked you once what you thought about it. And you were like, I didn't get a confident like, yes, get a master's degree. That is going to make you a data scientist. It was like lukewarm at best, And then I was like, okay, well, this guy knows what he's talking about, obviously. So let me not focus on the master's degree. Let me focus on like differentiating myself in my career. Went to Nordstrom eventually, and then was a senior data analyst over there. A lot of opportunities to do data science work. I really forced my work into data science and analytics over there, and actually inadvertently a lot of data engineering because I was building a lot of tools for the data analyst to use because I was one of the few data analysts that knew how to code on the team. And yeah, I was.
Quick segue. How did you force your work when you say that? Like, what do you mean by that?
Oh man! So this is a technique I tell people in private that I try not to advertise on podcasts in case a boss hears me. But basically, if I find work I really don't want to do, usually it's building a dashboard or something like that, or running like a very boring SQL query. What I will do is I will put that work on the back burner and I'll do something I'm very interested in, but make sure it drives a lot of value. Like I'll code up this like whole tool that like automatically like, offloads a bunch of work for a bunch of analysts, and I'll show my boss that. That way my boss is like, well, I mean, okay, so he didn't do what I asked him to do, but I mean, this is also very useful. We can't just like, I shouldn't reprimand him because this is very useful. And then obviously, I do have bosses that are like, no, but we also need you to do this other thing. But usually, I mean, I've had great bosses that like work with what I want to do in the workplace. But that I feel like to an extent, I also do earn that. I'm very lucky on one extent. And then, there is obviously some work that goes into like driving value in stuff I'm interested in. So, then there's an incentive for the boss to keep me because they're like, okay, well, he's putting more work in than, most people would, and he's driving value. So that's what I mean by doing work you want to do. I'm not advocating this strategy very strongly. I'm saying it worked for me. I will also say I'm just an extremely lucky guy that I've had only good bosses. But I know a lot of people that's just not the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I think that you earn leeway by doing good quality work, and if you're clearly critical thinking and figuring out what does drive value that aligns with the work that you're interested in doing, I don't see a good manager like you described isn't necessarily going to punish you for that, right? If you're creating value for the company, in theory, they should just be feeding you more work that you love doing if you're going to be doing a good job at that. I wouldn't say that the ask forgiveness, not permission approach is necessarily the best route to go in the short term for
We're not
everyone.
necessarily
It obviously,
advocating this, you know.
yeah, exactly. But I think that there's absolutely something to be said though um, for being able to align what you're interested with what you're doing and communicating that to your boss over time, because every boss wants, or they should want you to enjoy your work. And if you're enjoying your work, you're creating better outputs. So if you can align those things, which I think is not overwhelmingly difficult. I mean, there are going to be some things that like you probably are going to get tasked with that you don't want to do. But if you're good enough at the other things that you do, like we described earlier, so good they can't ignore you, then they'll just give that work to someone else. So,
And that's
you
usually
know,
what happens.
exactly. And that's okay.
It's not a dashboard.
All right. So we went on a little tangent there, but back to the topic at hand, the sort of path into the data engineering.
Right. So I made sure I coded every single day, built up my development skills, and then I got an opportunity to interview at a undisclosed big tech company. There are a lot of undisclosed over here, just to make sure that I don't shoot myself in the foot on accident. But they wanted me on as a machine learning SWE. So based on that, people who are informed in the industry, you can probably guess what the company is, quite honestly, because I believe only like 2 or 3 of them actually call it that. But yeah, so this company, they were like, oh yeah, we want you to interview for machine learning SWE. I passed the basic recruiting interview. Then the tech interviews were coming up. So I was just like grinding out systems design. I was just grinding out like lead code and stuff. Because as much as people say they hate that, I don't know why people say they hate lead code so much. Like I love that there's a very clear path that says just grind this and you will get a job. You will never receive that kind of clarity in any job. You know, like, I mean, I love the clarity, you know, then it's just hours put in, you know. But you know, that's just me. And I just happened to have an opportunity to interview with Bet Fanatics, which is the company I'm working with right now. And it's because I was in Seattle. Important tip for people: there is a legitimate economic benefit to being in the centers of innovation of your industry. They were in Seattle because it's an AWS company, and they needed AWS training. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to Seattle. AWS headquarters right over there.
The Mecca of AWS.
Huh?
The Mecca of AWS.
Exactly. And I mean, even if they need like Google Cloud training, Google Cloud's headquarters, or I don't know if it's their headquarters, but one of their biggest offices, it's like 10 minutes away from me. There's a legitimate benefit to overpaying on rent to be in the Mecca of, what your industry is all about. So I went to a happy hour. Happy hour networking events, always go to those because your force of personality can obviate the need to, go through a lot of the singing and dancing you need to do during an interview process where you can be what they're looking for, but the person's just having a bad day. People are generally in a good mood at happy hours. Or, even if they're in a bad mood, you can take advantage.
They're called happy hours.
Yeah, exactly. And then I told them, the director, I said, yeah, I'm only going to transition if I can get a data scientist or data engineering position. I don't want to become a data analyst again. And I'm on track to being a data scientist at Nordstrom. So, why even leave? And then she's like, okay, we'll interview you for both and then, see what you fit into better. And they believed I fit in as a data engineer better, which honestly, looking back at it, I think is true. If you want to become a data scientist on the IC path, you eventually have to learn the core mathematics behind it. I think you can avoid the mathematics for a while, but you'll most likely eventually have to hit them up, or go into management. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll go into engineering, avoid the math.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think, unbelievably introspective of you, right? I really like your process of evaluation, kind of setting clear goals and knowing what you want. I feel like it seems like so many people forget that step, right? I like to think that life is sort of a greedy algorithm where you go to the best opportunity that you have with the information that you have. But people forget that they can also gather more information to make a better informed decision. And part of that is thinking about where you want to go and what the process is. So I think that making the best decision based on the research that you do and the understanding of yourself is a very valuable thing to add. I am interested Obviously we've talked. I know that like finances are important for you, right? That is something
Extremely.
that is a key motivator. I think, you know, it's important for me, but not on the same level as you, which I think is fine. Like everyone has different aptitudes, and you're very transparent about that, which is something I very much respect about you. Can you tell me, in terms of orders of magnitude, you know, from starting as a data analyst, essentially like less than 5 years ago, to
Mhm.
what you do now, what has been your multiplier of income? Or
Six
like
X.
close to it, 6x. I mean, that to me is pretty incredible about this domain, as if
Yeah.
like, you know, I don't think people can conceptualize how impressive that is, to be able to go and improve your amount that you make. And obviously that's not all in your work. You're doing content and these types of things as
Right,
well.
right. Let me be very clear. That includes my YouTube income and stuff too.
Yeah.
So, but
Um,
the majority of my income is still from my job.
yeah. And to me, that's something that is aspirational, right? Is that, hey, in this relatively short amount of time, you went from you essentially like 6x your income. You created all these different opportunities. You learned a lot of these skills. I don't know what other like formal career you could
Yeah.
be working in that would provide that type of growth in that short amount of time.
Medicine, because residents get paid nothing. I
Well,
have a
yes.
yeah. I literally went from literally yesterday. I was making 50K a year. Now I make $250,000 a year today. But it's
Yeah.
because like yeah, it's just yeah.
A different type of,
It,
because that
yeah.
depends when you actually cut that sample, right?
Right.
So if
Exactly.
you,
Exactly.
you know, I think that your sample is anywhere you cut it, you would have been making multiple X increases in income, which is pretty fascinating. Maybe
After
not the first year and a half.
COVID, after COVID, in theory, and again, there are infinite disadvantages that people can have. Like I do recognize. I want to make sure that I'm not like just saying anyone can do it. And, why doesn't everyone just do this? It's not like that. But after COVID, the biggest limitation factor for if you exclude like work, and stuff like that, assuming people know the career exists for people getting into these high end tech careers, because there are a lot of software engineers that like cap out at 150K, just because they don't work in like big tech or something. How was location? COVID has created an opportunity to make these insane wages anywhere in the country, and theoretically anywhere in the world. Theoretically, but anywhere in the country for sure. Um, I can confirm I've had 5 different companies reach out to me, fully remote opportunities, basically matching my current wages, and my current wages comfortably support me literally any location in the country, any major city in the country. I can go live in that city, and I will be very comfortable over there. Now, can I buy a house? Depends on how the stocks perform, honestly. That's a little bit different, but I think the whole housing stock in this country is that's a whole different issue. But you also don't need a house to live a very comfortable life. I mean, I have a whole theory on whether the average person should get a primary house or not. That's way out of the scope of this podcast, but yeah.
So, you said 5 recruiters have reached out to you. What has your demand looked like for your skills at other companies since you've switched to engineering?
Extremely high, way higher than data analytics. And let me be extremely clear. I'm not at all poo-pooing on the career of data analyst. I'm not at all saying this is like it's where I got started. Depending on what you want out of life, it's kind of a stopping point, or it's kind of a midpoint, right? There are many, like you can get paid $150,000 very comfortably as a data analyst. I mean, you'll have to be like a really like top tier one at a company that's willing to pay that. Usually in a high expense city, but but it's possible, right? And then a lot of people want to go into management, so you go from data analyst to data analyst manager. I mean, if your team is driving extreme value, there's not necessarily a reason you shouldn't get paid as much as a data science manager. Now, will you? I'm not exactly sure. But at the end of the day, the people who are writing code, building up infrastructure, designing systems, they're the people who are going to be paid and demanded the most. Like the pay correlates to demand, and there's this kind of misguided philosophy, I think, that we have in the U.S. I don't know. I only say that because I don't know if it applies in other countries where people like I've heard people on more than one occasion say, because I'm more or less open with how much I make in private, just to kind of see if I can inspire people. Like, look how much money there is out there. You can grab some for yourself too. And the number of people that say like, oh yeah, but I respect my work-life balance. And I think in the past, when investment banking was like the only non-master's degree career you could take that would take in thousands of people per year and would pay insane salaries, that logic made 100% sense. Investment bankers, doctors, lawyers, these people have no work-life balance. I didn't even know this. As a doctor, if you're diagnosed with like a mental health condition, you could lose your board certification. Like it's insane. Yeah, it's crazy. I feel so bad for them, you know? But software has created this like huge pool of like necessary talent where these people get paid insane amounts of money and are treated very well. Like the number of engineers I know that do not work 8 hours a day is probably greater than the ones I know that do, as long as they work in big tech, you know?
Well, you look at investment banking too. On the flip side of that, investment bankers, for the most part, are almost completely replaceable, right? You look at the skill set that the average investment banker uses, and they're making slides. I mean, I have a lot of friends. I was looking to investment banking and
it's a sales job, right?
Yeah, in some sense.
I don't know if sales. When you say replaceable, what do you mean? Like, how do you replace a salesperson?
I mean, I think in some sense, like let's say an entry level investment banker, right?
Yeah.
You're not even really
100%.
Yeah, you're not even really doing sales. You're essentially like making decks for the people who are actually doing the sales.
That's why they get treated so poorly, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and that's the thing is that I think your skill set as a data scientist, a data analyst, data engineer, machine learning engineer, whatever it is significant. Like the barrier to get that skill set is a lot harder than it would be as an entry level investment banker. And so if we like zoom out on that, like, yes, there are filters for investment bankers, right? But the filters mainly are what school you went to.
The filters are due to competition, not due to technical skills.
Correct.
I went to Emory, huge school, just churns out IB people. Massive respect to these people because they are actually insane. Like, I think there's something wrong with them in that, like, how hard they work and how hard they compete with each other. Emory's business school grades on a bell curve. There are going to be people who fail just because they're not at the top of the bell curve, no matter how good their work is. You know, like, it's a zero-sum game in that industry. So, no, you're 100% right. Yeah, it's technology is not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, and but to that point, like, you need something other than money to incentivize people to come to your company. And I think work-life balance, especially if this group is not as, you know, if there's a limited amount of people that have that skill set, maybe in investment banking, there's a limited amount of people that are willing to work that hard, but you don't find that out until like they quit after a year, right?
Exactly.
It's hard to evaluate if they're going to quit. It's really easy to evaluate if a data analyst or software engineer is going to quit because there's so many other options. It's like so much more availability and like just one more thing, one more benefit. I mean, to be perfectly honest, right? At least to me, I see no difference or like no tangible difference between like $550,000 and $650,000, right? Yeah. The amount that I can do with that money is like at that point, it is significantly less material. And if one company is going to treat me significantly better, that $100,000 is going to be something that like I would invest in myself. It's weird, but you get like diminishing marginal returns on income, which is a pretty at least for me. Not everyone thinks that way. I think a lot of people be like, oh, an extra $100,000 a year, like, you know, that leads to something greater in the future, whatever it is. But for a lot of software engineers, I think that is a super salient factor.
Oh, it's 100% true. I mean, with IB, I think one thing people like about it is that you were talking about leverage, right? IB gives you an insane amount of leverage if you're willing to perform at the absolute highest levels, because you get a cut of the deal. You know, that's you know, it's the way technology scales by the people impacted. IB scales by the dollars involved, and I think that's why people are into it. You know, because the potential to become an insta millionaire is there if you are willing to just put your head to the grindstone and, you know, basically not have a life. Which is why I like engineering. You know, it's a career where you do get, I don't know if you get that kind of leverage. Like, I don't know how many engineers can make $1 million+ a year. But like you said, like at a certain point, what's this money even doing?
Yeah. Oh, I would say disproportionately. Maybe it's because they have more free time. Engineers, data folk, whatever it is. I think that they're more inclined to do side hustles, start other businesses. And the return on that to me is infinite. Like, to be perfectly transparent,
Sure.
I already make more money annually on the other businesses that I have than I do in my main work. And it's pretty close. It's not like, but the amount that the content and the agency stuff and the courses, the amount that that's grown annually is like
Right.
unbelievable in proportion to the amount that my income that a company would pay me has grown.
Like
And
how
to
long have you been
me,
doing this stuff versus your job,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's something that's really interesting is that, okay, like, yes, it investment banking and one of these other careers can scale in that way. But if you're interested in having like upside through your own things, you can use that extra time, that like balance in the work-life balance,
Mhm.
to do whatever you want. Right. I mean, I know some
Right.
people, like crazy people, that are working 2, 3 full-time jobs in tech that are each paying like over 100K a year.
Beginning of the
Right.
pandemic, that's what I was doing too. It's
Yeah.
again because you totally can, if you manage your meetings well and you turn in your work. And I see zero ethical issues with that as long as you are turning in what is expected of you.
Yeah. And the companies aren't competing or anything like that.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, well, and that's usually you have that written into your employment contract. Like there's like a list of companies you can't, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, so, but to just rewinding a little bit to the data analyst, and you weren't poo-pooing it, but you were saying, hey, this is maybe more of like a, a, a pivot point, right? Where,
Mhm.
or I look at it as sort of a trampoline. So in one of the most recent videos that I made, is data science a good career? I talk about exit opportunities.
Mhm.
And, from a data scientist, what is the outcomes that you can go into? I mean, it's pretty open. You can go into a bunch of engineering, you can go into management, you could even
Mhm.
technically start your own stuff. I look at a data analyst role in a very similar way, where a lot of these other opportunities that have tremendous amounts of upside, they're now accessible to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
some people might love data analyst work. That's totally fine. You can continue to do it. But that's not, in my mind, where the value is. The value is where you can actually go from there, um, and like the other opportunities that can come out of it. I mean, data analysts for the most part are a bit more generalists, and the ability to specialize, in my opinion, is where you can make true financial and personal growth. Because when you specialize, it's a lot harder to replace you, right? Because you know this very important thing really well. Um, and maybe this is a lot on just like general career advice, but I really behoove people to think about what is the upside, what is the exit opportunity, even when you're just starting,
Oh,
right? That's
100.
exactly what you did. um, and it might be hard to do that, but that's also part of the work, is that when you're doing it, you can start thinking about, what do I actually want to do from here? Do I enjoy this? Because my greatest fear is getting caught up in the momentum and just idling, basically. um, Maybe that's a personal thing, but I get very uncomfortable when I'm like, where's this
Oh,
going? What's
same.
what's it all for?
Look, we spend the majority of our lives working at the end of the day, right? Like let's just exclude sleeping as an activity. The majority of our lives are spent working. I never understood people who don't put a lot of thought into their career, and into what they like. What is the 5 year plan from what we're doing here? Um, you spend the majority of your existence doing this, um, and it's also why I'm very open about finances as well, right? Like probably in a country like the U.S. Or I mean, I'm quite honestly almost anywhere on the planet, right? There's a minority of people I know that this wouldn't affect them, but a small, like 51% of your happiness is in some way dictated by how well are you managing your money. It's not how much you make, right? Like you can make 150 be very very happy. You can make 550 be completely miserable. But how do you manage your finances, right? Do you spend a lot less than you make? Do you have a cushion in the inevitable, hope, God forbid, but the inevitable case that something bad happens to you? Can you, sustain yourself based on your savings? And, a lot of that is determined on how good is your job? How much money are you able to generate from your job? How in demand is what you're learning, right? Why are there all these YouTube videos of people showing their workspace at Google? It's because people know that this is a desirable place and a desirable place to work, and you can get instant clicks from just showing your workplace. Again, not putting down anyone that did that. I'd say now it's a bit overdone, but not putting down anyone who's done that. Yeah, and I don't know. I heavily encourage people to have these uncomfortable conversations with themselves, right? For me, it was uncomfortable when someone told me, like I had an investment bank friend tell me, oh yeah, but like I have like, a couple $1 million like in owed money over the next like, decade or so for XYZ. Basically, like the career path for people with a certain set of skills, IB makes a lot of sense for them. And if they're willing to put in a certain amount of effort and stuff like that. Not becoming a doctor, I don't have the career certainty that doctors do. Like doctors do not get fired unless they like really, really mess stuff up, right? You're more or less guaranteed a solid lifestyle for the rest of your life, right? Just don't TikTok your operations and leave tools inside the patients. Like that guy that, I don't know what country he was in, but some doctor was like doing that, like left stuff inside patients. Don't mess up that badly,
Yeah.
So I'm brutally honest with myself about like the detriments to my own career. I spend so much time behind a computer. Like if I don't actually work on it, my social skills deteriorate. Like that is totally a thing that engineers go through, carpal tunnel syndrome. That's like going to happen. Like the stuff is important to think about, I was in the elevator today and like, the receptionist was asking me, oh yeah, are you ever like worried about your eyesight? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to be like legally blind by the time I'm 60. But they should make a parody movie. You have Legally Blonde for lawyers, Legally Blind for engineers and tech people.
We'll put it on your channel.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. Okay.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the most salient points, though, is that it's all an equation for you to figure out, right? Based on what you like, your aptitudes, your interests. To me, the choose your own adventure portion of it is what makes it fun. Mm-hmm. But if someone else chooses your like adventure for you, you're inevitably not going to be in a good place.
And don't make up facts to fit a narrative. That's a really dangerous thing people tend to do.
Confirmation bias, major issue. Yes.
So I come from Dallas, Texas. I love the city. It has again, if you want to live a solid middle-class lifestyle, I will say Dallas, Texas is one of the best places on the planet to do it. Job opportunities are high, taxes are low, and the cost of living is quite low over there compared to how much you can make. But the number of people, like friends I have in Dallas, that are like, oh yeah, why would you like live in New York? It's too expensive. Why would you go to LA? It's too expensive. What about all the taxes and everything? The thing is, once you start making a certain amount of money, who cares about the taxes? That's not, or I wouldn't say who cares about the taxes, but that's not like, and you run a business, right? So it's a little bit different because you have all these additional taxes you have to pay for. Business is very different. But as a, just an employed dude, and like all my taxes go to my, they're just my income taxes. Even on YouTube, I just pay income tax on that. Like the opportunity, like it's something I read on Reddit. And I thought it was kind of interesting about like a lot of people from these smaller cities, which, again, nothing wrong with them, but sometimes they'll say that to justify their lower incomes. In Dallas, Texas, you're not going to be paid the kinds of salaries you're paid in New York. Again, not to say the cost of living is not a thing. I do think SF's a little bit ridiculous, but it's confirmation bias in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, that is something I have been thinking about a lot recently. Is what lies do I tell myself to justify what I'm doing? And those are hard conversations for me to have. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've talked pretty openly, at least with my friends. I don't think I've done it via podcast or anything, but I've been pretty disappointed with myself this year. Right, I took on a lot of things, probably more than I should have, and I haven't been able to do them to the best of my ability. And to me, the question is like, could I have actually done them to the best of my ability, or am I making excuses for myself for not giving the best output, for being lazy, for procrastinating, for doing those types of things? And unfortunately, I think I am making some excuses for myself in a lot of ways. Like, yes, there's unavoidable things, but I could be saying no to more things too. I could be, I could be sacrificing some of my free time or some of the things that I enjoy to actually keep up with my responsibilities that I've chosen for myself. And, that's something that, again, these conversations with yourself are very, very difficult. But I think that's what you need to do to continually grow as a person and to evolve and to, to find the career you're interested in, or to be true to yourself rather than to your parents or to other people or whatever it might be. And, it's hard for, like, the point is, it's hard for us too.
Yeah.
It's not like an easy thing to do. It kind of sucks because you're like, wow, I could be so much better than I am right now.
A lie I tell myself all the time is that coding is what makes me money. And it is, but it's not coding. It's the creation of value for my company, of which one part I hate about my job, but I have to get better at it, is managing Jira boards. And managing Jira boards and making sure other engineers are getting their work done. Because, let's say you're working with an offshore team, right? Like, managing that offshore team is, you can drive a lot. I can drive a lot more value. Like, currently where we are in product development, I can drive a lot more value by handling that better than I can by like developing some random algorithm that does something that is maybe useful right now, right? It's a hard conversation I had to have with myself this week, where it's like, okay, writing code right now, where we are in product development for myself, is not necessarily where I can drive the most value. Even though I'm an engineer, some project management is where I can actually drive more value.
Yeah. I actually had that realization too. The problem is, I'm realizing I just don't like project management. Like, it's not something I enjoy at all.
And unfortunately, you can't outsource parts of your job like you can in a business, right? In a business, you can maybe you can do it, but it's like, I can't hire some dude to do it for me.
Exactly. I mean, maybe you can at a certain scale. That's what I'm working on, is like, who do I hire to project manage my entire life? You said something interesting about your work. You said at the stage that you're at, you came into this company, if I recall correctly, like as they're building things up and scaling things up. Can you talk to me about what that's like? I mean, a lot of people go into this system that's already like firing on all cylinders. It seems like this role is very much like you get to be a part of the building process. If correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, and it's super cool. It's one of the biggest reasons I joined, right? Because there's a limited number of opportunities in your life where you can kind of have everything. I always like to say, like, there's a great, it was like a paper I read on like the psychology of the average American. And it talked about kind of how Americans as a people, we are extremely hopeful for the future. And it reflects differently amongst Europeans, where that hope is a little bit more skeptical about like the guarantee of a better future. And a lot of that just has to do with, like, not because we're special, but because our land is special, good government policy in general, distance from foreign conflicts. And I swear I'm going somewhere with this, but it's an interesting, the living in America, being brought up as an American, but being brought up by immigrant parents, right? My parents are from India, and like India is, it's a country, while it's doing better, it's still a country of little. There are 1 point whatever billion people, basically fighting over $2 trillion of wealth. That's not that much to go around. And a good section of that's just, people in the upper class are able to get it. So that immigrant mentality was very much like built into me, of like, you can't have everything you want all at once at the same time. And that skepticism for like, no, I have to like just sit and grind at the grind wheel. And I can't have everything I want. Yeah, I have to like struggle. Struggling is important because it's just the way life works. This job gave me a very interesting opportunity to not only work at a startup, but get paid very well to do so. Working at a startup is very easy. Getting paid very well once you do it once is fairly simple to do too. But doing both at the same time, it's a golden opportunity. How many companies can I get paid what I do to build infrastructure from the ground up and like define what legacy code gets built out? I am the legacy code, So for me, it's been a really cool opportunity, because I imagine it's not something I'll get to do much more in my life, where I get to see how experienced people, we hire a lot of FANG people. So how like very experienced people who know how to build scalable systems actually build stuff up from the ground up. And because there's no legacy code, we can use whatever AWS services we want to. It gave me a great opportunity to do tons of research into all the new tools that like AWS has released in the last year or two, into ways that they've improved tools in the last year or two. Athena, for example, is way better than it used to be. It used to not be like the best thing ever. Now it's way better. S3, you can have static websites on it. They have like AWS like fin spaces now, which you can use to like manage your entire financial, like your entire FP&A now, instead of getting like a separate tool for it, like Dynamics 365 or something. And being able to define that from the ground up is pretty cool. Now, here's the one thing that is kind of less interesting about it. Data engineers are not data creators, and data engineers cannot really create something from nothing. A software engineer, right? The app starts with them. It gets created by them, but they're also the data producers, right? So the data that their app produces is what we manage. Currently, there's not too much data to manage. So, there's a lot of code that we just can't write because there's no data to manage at the moment. We're just creating infrastructure. So on one hand, it's really cool to see how stuff gets started from the ground up. On the other hand, we're also kind of like waiting for like more data to come in. That way we can see how it affects the infrastructure that we've set up. So a really, really roundabout way of saying it's a rare opportunity to truly live the American dream of getting everything you want all at once, instead of the more immigrant mindset of like suffering is life,
Yeah, the blue-blooded American dream, dude. Look at you living it. I love it.
Yeah.
So something I thought was pretty interesting, obviously at our meetup, you got a chance to hang out with Ben Rogajan and Zach Wilson quite a bit, two prolific data engineers in their own right, who both I've had on the podcast. I'll link those episodes below. But what was your biggest takeaway from speaking with them so much? I feel like that's a really cool opportunity, especially as you're moving into this new data engineering role. Like, what were some of the biggest questions that maybe you had for them too?
Driving value as a data engineer, there are multiple avenues to do it. So, and Zach and Ben can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong over here, but kind of my observation of the two is that Zach kind of is, I get the impression that he's a 10x developer. That's very much the impression I get talking to him. We had the Iron Analyst, and like the code this guy was writing to just like rip through that 40 gigabytes of data was like better than what anyone else had written, including myself for sure. And he knew these techniques and stuff that like are obvious of like this man has like software engineering experience. So I get the impression that he's a 10x developer, and that's that is not to. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that, especially anyone feel free to follow his LinkedIn and you'll see how far he's come in life. It is genuinely impressive. And you talk to Ben, right? And you get maybe Ben's a 10x developer. I don't actually know. But what I know about Ben is that he understands problems and how to solve them in the industry at a very high macro level. You ask him about any tool, and he's like, here's my educated opinion on this tool, given all the experience I have with it. This is why Snowflake is good. This is why Databricks is good. Like, he has an entire series on his YouTube channel. By the way, for anyone that doesn't know, Ben Rogajan's a Seattle data guy. He has this entire like series on his YouTube channel, which is like a great way to get educated on this space as to, like, why is Snowflake important? What was the industry like before Snowflake came around? And why do people care about it today? Why is the data lake house that Databricks have? Why is that such a big deal? I would say they both reached like great levels of success going kind of like two different ways in their career. Like Zach is really like digging deep into becoming a better and better engineer is the impression I get. And Ben is digging deep into becoming a better like person who can like knows how the industry works at a very high level and how to set up infrastructure and set up stuff like that. And it makes sense, right? Like Zach is a FANG guy, and then Ben is a former FANG, but he does his independent consulting now. So that's kind of the impression I got. Like, I have two major routes I could choose to really upgrade myself in the data engineering space, and I need to decide which one I want to do because I don't really know which one I want to do. They both sound awesome. Like, I was just like, like sitting like there, like, oh yes, teach me, teacher, the entire time, like. Like really wide-eyed and everything. And I genuinely don't know which approach I want to take. So gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah, well, the nice thing is that you're still, relatively speaking, early in your career, which I think is fascinating, right? We all are. Most of the people at least in the YouTube content game. I think that there's other people. Right. I mean, even Zach, he's younger than I am, right?
Yeah, he's my age.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about, right? It's but it's also a good thing where it's like, hey, we those people still have a long way to go, like what's possible on their end, and everyone that you described has done some pretty incredible things in a relatively short period of time. I think that what a lot of people don't realize is, the amount you can do in a year. You can do a lot in a year, but you generally you underestimate or you overestimate what you can do in a year. But in a 5-year period, you way underestimate what you can do. I mean, if you were to go back and tell yourself 4 years ago where you'd be now, do you think you would have believed that?
Oh, no way. I was, I almost flunked out of college. I have my bachelor's degree, but like just barely. I have like I think it's like a sub 2.0 GPA or something. It's really, really, really bad. Like I'm a dino. I have a degree in name only, and like especially when you're raised your entire life, obviously, like, just the education system, but also, I mean, I come from an Indian family. Like this is education is a very, very important thing for us. And you're raised your entire life to kind of put your self-worth on your academic achievement, and then you just like fail so hard. It's easy to extrapolate that into just general self-worth. And my dad kind of told me, like, again, this kind of goes into the whole thing about like why Americans are such a hopeful people. Like this is a country where you can do you can flunk so badly in college and still just economically dominate. In countries like India and countries like China, because they have, again, over 1 billion mouths to feed, that is just less possible. Like you have the Gaokao in China, which determines a huge portion of your future. India is not too dissimilar, honestly. Where
there's placement from college, essentially. Like if you do well in college, you get placed into jobs rather than. It's very interesting.
Exactly. Whereas here, like I don't think anyone's ever checked a transcript. I think at most people have checked my background just to make sure I do have a degree. So yeah, no, you're 100% right. I think 4 years ago, if you'd asked me, I would have been like, I'll probably be like in some $80,000 a year job, somewhat happy with life, and I at this point, if I was able to keep this income for the rest of my life, I could live the life I want to. I do not have to make any more money yearly. I mean, I want to, but I don't need to. And it feels very good to be able to say at the age of 27, I've achieved the max income I will ever need to achieve. I mean, adjusted for inflation, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very powerful thing. Obviously that's really important. Being able to reach maybe like a milestone like that. Maybe even more important is that I am currently speaking with the reigning iron analyst. And I'm interested if if you have any thoughts on that experience, and if you have anything you'd like to say to fellow or future competitors, anyone you'd like to call out, anything along those lines.
I've wanted to comment on this for a while. So let me be extremely clear. Every single one of those competitors is technically more competent than I am. Like their code is better. They've been working in the industry for longer. And I'm not trying, this is not meant to brag. This is like, I genuinely do believe that they are all just like technically way more competent than I am. And this kind of goes into like, what is competition all about, right? If you're in sports, well, it's fairly one dimensional. The fastest runner in the world is the fastest runner in the world. There's only one dimension this person can compete on. Even in basketball, right? Like, the Golden State Warriors have like their strategy, of just like 3-pointers over and over and over again, right? Like there are more dimensions to compete on, but that too, only so many. In a regulated competition, there are only so many dimensions you can compete on. So grinding is how the Kobe method. Why aren't you here 3 hours early? Why aren't you leaving 3 hours late? I am going to be mad at you and be an asshole to you. Michael Jordan, same thing, right? I don't know if Steph Curry is like that or not, but I know Jordan and Kobe are. When you are working in an unregulated competition, such as the one we were talking about in the Iron Analyst, right, where it is really open-ended, you need, and you're competing against people who are better than you, in the traditional metric sense, right? You need to find a way to stand out somehow else, right? Like, and so you break the competition down, right, into like, what are the dimensions I can compete on? What is the eventual end product these people are looking at, right? And what I knew was it was a dashboard that was being presented as if I was presenting it to an executive team. The executive team could give two shits about how complicated the data munging was. They do not care. Maybe you'll have a sympathetic CTO that's like, oh yeah, I remember back when I was an engineer, this would have been really impressive, But the executive team cares about business value and how well do you present that business value. So that's why from the second I started that competition, I was like, okay, these people are all smarter than me. I can't outcode them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work with a small section of this data, not mention that I did, and then talk about, future state will add more. We can. This is a scalable solution. Future state, we can always add more data, and create something that the executive team could perceive greater value being derived from. It's a product. It has a very clear. It always has to have a visual component to it. If your presentation to an executive team doesn't have a visual component to it, it's not going to work. So yeah, I mean that's kind of the method I took towards it. If you don't think you can outgrind other people, find ways to creatively compete against them. So
yeah, something that I really took away from your work in that one, and don't take this the wrong way, I didn't personally feel like you did anything like outrageously well, right? Like everything that you did was like it was very good, but it wasn't something that like particularly stood out, right? But everything that you did was at a high quality, and together the judge, based on the criteria the judges were looking at, it was a lot like in aggregate better than what everyone else did. And I think that that's something that people don't realize, is that you can specialize through a combination of skills or outcomes. I used this analogy earlier when we were talking like offline, where if you're taking the GMAT, right, you have a verbal section, or like an English section, or like I forget what it is, and then a quantitative section. And you can be like, I think it's like 82nd percentile in both, but combined, that means you're in like the 95th percentile overall. Right. And that's pretty impressive, is that, through these two things, if you're doing well in both, you're going to be better than the group. And, like we were evaluated on a little bit on how you manage the data, the visualization and the explainability, the creativity of the analysis and the presentation. And across all those categories, you were strong. Again, not like unbelievable in any of them. Like, for example, Keith's presentation was like, I wouldn't say it was Jobs-esque, but it was something that was like fundamentally different from everyone else. Or Zach's data engineering it was fundamentally different. And for example, Luke's dashboard, I think, was like very clear, but in terms of ingenuity and a lot of those things, they weren't necessarily as well-rounded. And so, people get really, they get concerned with generalist versus specialist, but I think it is a form of specialization to be good in multiple areas at the same time. Probably not all areas. I mean, as you mentioned, like the actual engineering that you did where you didn't use all the data.
Exactly.
Wasn't the strongest. Simple, yeah. But the other things that you did that were all very strong were what really carried you to the victory there. And I think that is such like an overwhelmingly cool idea. I think if you really put your mind to it, you could be elite in all of those. And I wouldn't say that everyone else was significantly better in terms of technical skills. That's definitely not true. There was, however, some controversy. Obviously, Luke suggested that you were cheating by streaming and having people, in theory, comment. What are your thoughts on that?
So I would say, okay, that is a 100% fair way of looking at it. I don't believe I received any help in the comment section. What I will say is I challenge anyone else to try and code and talk about their code while they're coding, and tell me how much brain power that uses. It's mentally extremely taxing. Like I think I'll leave it at that. It's mentally very taxing to explain your code while you're coding to people, and still develop something useful. So, that would be my response to that.
That makes a lot of sense. Is there anyone, for example, in the future Iron Analyst competitions that you'd like to call out? Are there any changes to the rule set or things along those lines? I think perhaps in the next one, it would be, we might have a head-to-head battle in true Iron Chef style. But any thoughts there?
I think 1 more hour would be beneficial for people. Just have an extra hour, because I think that would lead to a end product that is more impressive for everyone. easier for the judges to judge, easier for the audience to like understand what was the point of this. I think that's one thing that I would do. And then I don't know, the size of the data set and everything was, I think that's important to figure out, okay, if because this is a real business scenario, right? Like I have had instances at my company where like a director comes and they're like, hey, we need you to like look through all the sales and like find something. I have a meeting in like 3 hours. Like it wasn't some made up, I mean, it was a made up scenario, sure. But like the basics of the scenario it's something I've encountered in my, real career. And I'm very clear with my director. I'm like, okay, look, we have 3 hours to get this. My computer's only this powerful. So like, we can do X, Y, Z, and this is what can be presented. Give the plan, and then, So I think the data set size was fine. I don't know if you can standardize computers. That would be very interesting if the computers could be standardized between all the competitors. That plus 1 more hour. Standardizing the computers plus 1 more hour, maybe.
Excellent. I think we'd concede maybe an extra half an hour. And then I personally liked the wrinkle of extra time if you were wearing Bright Data swag. That was I quite enjoyed that. And there's a nice sponsor engagement there as well. Again, is there anyone you want to call out? Is there anyone that you want to see compete next time? I want to
see Ben compete next time.
All right.
I 100%. I was surprised that Ben wasn't competing. I was like, I want to see Ben compete. I want to see Tina compete as well. But I would love to compete against Ben. That's that would be, beating Ben would be a nice feather in my cap. I've beaten Zach Wilson, the elite data engineer. Now need to add Ben to my belt of victories.
Amazing. Well, I think Tina said she would compete in the next one.
Nice.
Obviously there was not as much female representation in the competitors this time around, but I think that will change in a future Iron Analyst competition,
nice.
Which we're looking forward to. And the feedback seems to be good, so I would expect we'll be able to do another one at some point in the next 3 to 6 months.
Is it like The Bachelor? Do I get to be like a judge in the next one or something?
You can either be a judge, or you can maybe we can do something where it's multiple people take you on. Rather than like you're the benchmark that people go against.
Yeah.
And if I mean, it's in theory, it's no different, where you like outlast the competition.
Right.
But that would be, that would be something. It's like, does Shashank remain the Iron Analyst, or does someone else dethrone him? That could be kind of a cool, cool approach there.
No, I'm hoping we get to do it again. What would be really interesting is if, like, say you got a cloud provider to sponsor the competition, and no one is allowed to write any code. You only have to do it using all the cloud tools that are available to you. So, like, say you have AWS, right? Like, they have their own version of Tableau. There's obviously S3 and there's EC2, and like you can write SQL. Yeah, you can write SQL. That's the only language you're allowed to use. Could be an interesting way to go about it.
It could be. I would be so blown out of the water. Granted, I probably wouldn't compete because we need an announcer, but yeah, I was looking at that data set and I was thinking of some fun stuff. I was actually very disappointed that that most people tried to stay within the data realm.
Yeah.
I thought there was a lot of really cool opportunities to find more general insights about the job searching population. Like, I would have loved to know on Indeed what the most popular like domains for work are. Mm-hmm. Like something around that, or something around like type of work by state. That could be pretty interesting too, or region, or those types of things. But at the same time, I think we saw some pretty cool stuff. I definitely learned a lot on the engineering side after walking through a lot of the people's code, which was pretty impressive.
Well, and like one more thing I'd like to mention is like Mark, for example. So Mark was right next to me when I was like doing all this. Again, extremely smart guy, better engineer than I am for sure. One thing that he did that I took note of, right? There's a lot of unstructured data inside that data set. And I specifically completely ignored that because I was like, there is no way I'm going to be able to organize this data and like actually get anything useful out of it in the time that I'm allotted. And Mark just kind of went for it and got pretty far into it. I was very impressed with how far he was able to get into it. But I think the unstructured data was like given the time constraint, was an unrealistic thing, which is why I think an extra hour would allow for interesting things. The people who have like strong ML experience could get into the unstructured data and really tear that apart by the end,
Yeah. You could make like a bot that, like a GPT-3 bot that produces job descriptions based on a prompt or something. That would be neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Shashank, that was all I really had for you today. You have any additional thoughts you want to share? Any final thoughts as reigning Iron Analyst champion?
You know what? The world is, again, recognizing the disadvantages that people might have. The world is your oyster. Life is meant to be taken by the horns. You
very
like
investment banking. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, life is the bull market, and you're supposed to ride it all the way to major tendies. But I heard a hilarious joke today. What's the difference between an S&P bear and a polar bear? There is none. Polar bears are afraid of temperatures rising. S&P bears are afraid of the S&P rising, and both their houses are going to be liquid soon, anyways. I was like, I wish I could think of stuff that intelligent. No, but there's a lot of opportunity in life, and I think tech is the great equalizer in many ways. In that, not everyone can afford to spend $200,000 on medical education, but anyone can go onto YouTube, watch my channel, watch Ken's channel, learn all the content you need for free. Obviously, there's an advantage to going to a school, but I've seen people who without educations have gotten into the industry. Like, it is possible. So like obviously being tech people, we do advocate for that. So take life by the horns. Don't be afraid to chase money to a healthy extent. Don't get obsessed with it, but don't be afraid to chase it, because you'd be surprised how much misery exists in the world just because people don't have like enough money to do just the basic stuff they need. And this career gives an opportunity for you to do that. And like Ken was saying, I've seen a 6x difference in the last 4 years. There's basically nothing else I could have done that would have done that.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. A very optimistic podcast. Thank you so much for spending the time with me out of your day and providing such great wisdom.
Thank you. Have a good one, Ken.